Your Best Manager, episode 38.
Don was not a caring or demanding leader. He was both. And I really believe that the great leaders out there, that's what they are. They're not caring or demanding, they're both.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Your Best Manager podcast, featuring interviews with senior managers and leadership experts, as well as practical advice for first-time managers. And after today's show, be sure to hop over to yourbestmanager.com and check out the free management course, Fully Engaged in 10 Days, where you will learn 3 critical components to increasing employee engagement on your team. Have fun! Good leadership is timeless, everybody. This is Jamie Newman here, and I'm excited to be joined by Dan Gaynor today. Dan, how are you doing?
Doing well, Jamie. Thanks for including me in the podcast.
I'm excited to chat with you, Dan. Dan Gaynor is a leadership author, teacher, coach, and speaker who is passionate about promoting timeless leadership and healthy workplaces. A former president and publisher of the Calgary Herald, Dan now provides individual coaching, leadership workshops, and keynotes through his company, Gaynor Consulting. In 2014, Dan released his first book, The Heart and Hands of Leadership, The 12 Timeless Practices of Effective Leaders, which is an ideal leadership development resource with discussion questions accompanying each chapter. And Dan, before we jump in head first into everything, though, why don't you give us an overview of your career path and just how you got to where you are today?
Sure, Jamie. So my leadership career started way back when at the Edmonton Journal. My background is not journalism, it's advertising sales. So I started as one of 5 sales supervisors with a team of, I suppose, maybe 6 or 7 people, and then moved up through middle management at the Journal, and it ended, as you mentioned, as president and publisher of the Calgary Herald, where I had the privilege to lead 700 people.
Wow.
You know, I always approached leadership and every challenge with a core belief that if we got leadership right, the rest would kind of take care of itself. And I realized very early in my own career that every team reflects its leaders. So across the country, through a variety of different leadership positions, I always set the bar very high for the members of my leadership team. And I made changes when it became clear to me that people couldn't or wouldn't be able to lead well. I've often said that I made a pretty good career out of making tough decisions about people that I think others knew they had, but avoided.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that decision-making skill is one of the maybe least recognized skills in leadership. I mean, people talk about inspiration and people talk about courage and being able to have tough conversations and all this, but making tough decisions really defines you because, I mean, making the decision to terminate somebody or to make an organizational shift, like they're called tough decisions because they're not easy, right?
Exactly. I do one of my favorite workshops and speaking engagements is one I call the 7 most important choices a leader makes, because leadership's all about choice. And one of the choices on the list is that choice between confronting a situation and avoiding it. And so many of the leaders today that I see avoid difficult but important situations where really what they need to do is confront them and resolve them.
Absolutely. And it's way easier said than done. But again, that's why some leaders rise through the ranks and become people of influence, and why some people don't get those opportunities because they're willing to step outside their comfort zone and make those tough choices.
Well said.
I do have another question for you, though, and it's this thing on timeless leadership. So I'm wondering if you can help me out. Are you suggesting that some of the great leaders from, say, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, I don't know, 100 years ago, are you suggesting that the way that they led their teams, managed their teams, built relationships still works today, and that really we overcomplicate and try and, I don't know, reinvent the wheel or something?
Absolutely. There is a lot of trendy and faddish leadership thinking out there. And I'm a big believer that, and my career has convinced me. And, you know, I say that as somebody who's led people 20-year-olds and I've led 65-year-olds and everybody in between. And I'm a big believer that teams have always thrived or declined for largely the same reasons. So I'm not a proponent of generational leadership, that you would lead boomers differently than Xers or differently than millennials. Are these groups different? Yes, I would suggest they are, insofar as each generation finds its own way to get into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But the way we get them out of trouble and develop satisfying, high-performing workplaces is drawing on the same foundational, timeless leadership practices that good leaders have always employed.
Yeah, it's interesting because I talk a lot about millennials on the show, and I mean I'm a millennial myself, and it's really funny because one of the common things if you're to group that generation together is, well, millennials want to achieve something significant. They want to make lasting contributions. They want to have an impact. They want to be influential. They want to empower people. And what's really funny is, who says that Gen Xers and baby boomers don't want those things?
They've always wanted those things, Jamie. They've always wanted those things. If there's anything different about millennials, maybe it's just that they're less willing to put up with leaders who don't create those opportunities. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I agree. And it's interesting because all the surveys show that's to be true. But I just always find it funny because it's like, well, how do you lead millennials? Well, and what you're saying, and I agree with you, is the same way you lead anybody. Find out what's important to them and help them achieve those things through working with you in your company, on your team.
Well said. Well said. So you mentioned something that's near and dear to my heart. You mentioned achievement. Mm-hmm. And, I've always believed that achievement is a foundational human motivator. Mm-hmm. We've got grandkids now, and I look at them. I remember the first time our little now 5-year-old climbed the big stairs at Cochrane Park. And, mm-hmm. He got up to the top of the stairs of the big slide, threw his hands up in the air and screamed, "I did it."
Yeah.
He was feeling a sense of achievement. Mm-hmm. But sadly, a lot of us grown-ups, we lose that. Mm-hmm. And I think what a good leader does is create those opportunities for people to feel real achievement once again. Yeah. And when they do, they always come back for more.
I love that. Love that. Well, congratulations on building a successful career, Dan. And here's a big question for today's interview. When you look back on your own career, who was your best manager? And maybe it wasn't a manager, so it could be a mentor, but who had the most significant influence on your career and why?
Well, I didn't have that many, but it's an easy answer for me. It's a guy named Don Babbitt, who mm-hmm. I first met when I was back in that job at the Edmonton Journal. And Don was then the president and publisher of the Journal. And I worked for Don on and off over the course of my career. When I became the president and publisher of the Calgary Herald, Don was by then the COO of Southam, the company that owned all the newspapers.
Okay.
And the thing that I think made Don so great, and it's something I write about in the book, Don was not a caring or demanding leader. He was both. And I really believe that the great leaders out there, that's what they are. They're not caring or demanding. They're both.
I like that.
You get a leader who's really caring, that never makes any demands on people. And those leaders don't achieve much, and they mm-hmm. tend to create a bit of a country club. But you get a leader who is very demanding, but doesn't do anything to demonstrate that she or he cares about people. And that's a sweatshop. So we don't want the one. And the good leaders are the ones that every day that you go into work that you matter to them. Mm-hmm. And they're the ones that will expect and demand your best and nothing less. And Don was all of that.
Yeah. I'm curious though. So why do you think some people fall into one bucket or the other? I guess I understand the demanding piece. I mean, some people, they become managers and I guess they think very selfishly and maybe I don't know, they're just going to drive results because they want to gain something. But why do you? The one I find interesting is how people want to be caring, but don't set the bar very high. Why do you think people do that?
There are probably a number of reasons, but I think some of them would be too many leaders place too much importance on popularity. And it's easier to be popular when you're not making demands on people. I think probably, the other reason is that sometimes there's a lot of conflict avoidance in leadership. Some people just don't like confrontation and conflict. And so that drives a lot of avoidance, and it drives a lot of leaders to not make demands they really should make. I mean, I think the irony is that leaders who set out to be popular, to not rock the boat, are often among the least popular leaders because they don't take teams on missions that ever accomplish much.
Right.
And people want to be part of something that matters.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're saying that, and I actually, I mean, I've been there. I've been sitting in my office afraid to give tough feedback, or afraid to set the bar too high because, I don't want my team members to fail, but I also don't want them to not like me. So I've been there, and I've also been on the other side where I've been extremely demanding and had to been taken aside and given some tough feedback that I need to treat people like people. So I've been on both sides. So I think that's some good perspective to share, Dan. Yeah, I'm curious though, what is it about Don that demonstrated that he cared? Because I would also say it's really easy to demonstrate demands. I mean, just set high expectations are very clear, but showing that you care is a little bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, I have a favorite story that comes to mind. So I recall when I was back at the Edmonton Journal, and I'm a young 30-something supervisor with half a dozen people or so reporting to me, and my phone rang, and it was Don Babbitt. Now, there was a lot of space between my position and Don's on the org chart. So when the phone rang, I kind of snapped to attention. Man, what's the publisher for? And he says, "Hi, Dan, this is Don." I said, "Hello, Don." He said, "Can you come up to my office?" Well, I said, "Sure." So I dashed into the bathroom, and I straightened my hair and straightened my tie and put a shine in my shoes as I walked up to the corner office at the Edmonton Journal.
Yeah.
And walked around the corner, and there was another man there that I'd never met. And Don said, "Dan, I'd like you to meet Ken Wright. He's the vice president of human resources for our company. Ken, I'd like you to meet Dan Gaynor. He's a young leader that I think has a lot of potential. And I just thought you two guys ought to know each other." And he put a pot of coffee on the table and left us to talk.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, there's the president of our newspaper breaking trail for me in my career with a senior executive from head office.
Yeah.
Never forgot that.
Yeah. And it's something that is so easy to do, to make a connection. I mean, how much time did that cost Don? None.
None, but he had to think about it, and he had to care about me enough to do it.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing about that. Now, I'd also like to stay, and maybe you can relate this to another story, but I'm sure your career wasn't all rainbows and sunshine. So maybe you can talk a little bit about maybe the biggest challenge you faced, or even a commonality of some of the challenges that you faced.
I guess when I think about challenges, what comes to mind is that I've led 2 integrations. So the first integration I led came with my first cross-country move when I was appointed vice president of advertising at the Kingston Whig Standard, and we had just bought the paper from the Davies family, who owned it for a couple hundred years. And then 3 years later, I got my first appointment to the top job at a newspaper as president publisher of the St. Catharines Standard in St. Catharines, Ontario.
Yep.
And that was another integration. So that was one where I got to take the keys on day one as the new senior executive and lead that integration for 3 years. And, integrations, I think, are always challenging because they involve so much change for people.
Yeah.
When your company's been bought up by another, it can be a pretty traumatic experience for people, and they often feel vulnerable and sometimes even angry. And as a leader, you have to contend with all of that. So I would describe those probably as the biggest challenges that I faced. And, I guess I'd have to put on the list as well the 8-month strike at the Calgary Herald, because I led the Herald through that event. I mean, a lot of people think the whole paper went on strike, but in fact, it was 150 journalists that went on strike. The other 550 all worked through that event, and I had to lead them through that. But the commonality in all of that was leading people through difficult, significant, but really essential change.
Well, and the other thing is leading people through typically something that they've never been through before, right?
Yep.
I mean, I don't know how often, I don't know my newspaper history, but I don't know how often the strike happened. But I mean, most times when an organization is purchased, it doesn't happen frequently. I mean, in our market today, we're seeing it more and more frequently, but
Right.
That's something that's typically new to a lot of the employees who are impacted, which I guess as a leader, I mean, how do you even prepare for that?
Well, I mean, you got to have a good plan, but I think the most important thing that you have to do, and that I tried to do in every leadership position I ever held, you have to build strong relationships with people. All leadership is relational. And one of the things that I teach every day that I think is one of the most important lessons that is lost on so many leaders, Jamie, is that a lot of leadership is reciprocal. So people follow leaders who care about them. People care about leaders who care about them. And when a leader can build relationships, and I knew most of the 700 people that worked at the Herald, when you can build relationships in which people believe you really do care about them, because you do, they care about you, and they're much more inclined to want to help you, to want to go the extra mile for you. But I see leaders every day who do nothing to suggest they're interested at all in the people they lead. And then they wonder when they've got to lead a difficult change, why everybody's not lining up behind them.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard work. It's not simply buying someone a cup of coffee once in their career. You got to be intentional, and you got to notice. You have to listen. There's a lot of things that go into building a relationship. I think you're dead on. And I also remember this would have been, I think, hopefully I'm right on this, episode 11 of this podcast. I interviewed Terry Starbucker, St. Marie, and he talked about a very similar thing where he had to go in. They just purchased a new company, and he had to deal with some poor leadership prior to that. So he walked in where there were no relationships, where there hadn't been strong leadership, and so you had a very skeptical group of people about this new leader coming in. And it was the exact same thing. He's like, we had to go in, sit down with them, and get to know them, and that takes an investment of time. But if you're going to build trust or rebuild trust, relationships, you have to invest time and energy into building those relationships. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I took a half day every single week and walked the Herald from end to end, and just visited and talked with people. And at least 3 days a week, I ate in the cafeteria and did it and moved to a different table every time, because it was an opportunity to get to know people and to build relationships.
And that means so much to those people. It's gonna be a silly story, but I remember. So my first job was at McDonald's. I worked there for 5 years, and when I talk about my time there, it's always positive, and I always relate that back to we had owners that truly cared about the business. I mean, you go to McDonald's today, and I always get frustrated if I don't get great service, because I know their metrics and I know what it takes to do well there. But one of the things that our owner did was every Saturday, which is the busiest day of the week, in the morning, he would come in and he would work alongside all the employees. And the owner doesn't have to do that. The general manager obviously should probably be their busiest day, but our owner and the owner's wife would come in. He knew every single person by name, and he would literally spend 4 to 6 hours with the people. And it meant so much to these high school students and to myself, because it's like, we get to know the owner. The owner actually cares. And so I'm sure the impact that you had by giving up half of your day and by going and sitting at different tables, I'm sure that made a huge impact on the people that you got to interact with.
Well, I think that where you spend your time says a lot about what's important to you.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite leadership books is John Wooden's book, Wooden on Leadership. Wooden, of course, was the legendary coach of the UCLA Bruins, won 8 national championships, and was a guy who was, for his whole life, so intentional about leadership. But one of the things that Wooden wrote in that book is to find ways to show you care. And then he went on to write that even the smallest gestures can make the biggest difference. Mm-hmm. And Wooden was a very demanding leader by any description, but he also found ways to show he cared.
Awesome. And that's called Wooden on Leadership?
Wooden on Leadership, yeah.
Nice. I will write that down and include that in the show notes. So, awesome topic. But we are going to run out of time if we keep talking about this. But that's what happens when you get on a good subject. So, I'd like to jump back into today. And Dan, why don't you tell us something exciting that's happening in your world and your business right now?
Well, I guess two things. I've started a new series of offsite leadership workshops, half-day workshops that I'm doing here in Calgary at the Canoff Center. Mm-hmm. So they're 1:30 to 4:30 afternoons on really the skills of leadership. So this spring, I'm offering four, one next week in February, and then one a month through until May. So I'll be doing one this month in another week's time. I'm doing on leader-follower relationships. I'm doing one after that on feedback, then one on performance management, and then I'm finishing up in May with a half day on communication skills. So I'm excited about that because
very cool.
It's giving people a new way to access leadership development without actually bringing me inside and on site. And I guess the other thing that comes to mind is the book. I'm excited about the book, and it's available either in soft cover or it's available on all the major ebook platforms.
Nice. Well, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the book, because on every episode, I always like for people to recommend a book for first-time managers, and I feel like your book may be appropriate. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I would love to. So the title of the book is The Heart and Hands of Leadership, the 12 Timeless Practices of Effective Leaders. And I wrote the book in two parts. The first part of the book, which is maybe 20% of the book, looks at the heart of a leader, and it really examines two questions. What are the characteristics it takes to be a good leader? And things like empathy, courage, introspection, a few others that I talk about. And then it also looks at the motivations that are driving the leader. And then the second part of the book, which is about 80% of the book, is 12 separate chapters, each dedicated to the skillful hands. So for me, leadership is those two halves, and the skills, it's really a lifelong apprenticeship. So I write about very practical skills. If there's anything I want my work to be, whether it's speaking or workshops or writing or the book or coaching, I want it to be practical. I want people to come away with skills that they can put to work right away. So I wrote about things like creating culture and how you do that. I wrote about communication, workplace coaching, feedback skills, performance management skills, vision, team building, how to hire the people, the right people the first time. And I wanted to write a book that would be a good read, but would also be highly practical.
I love that, because there's so much stuff out there that's theory, and sometimes it's tough to take that head knowledge or take theory and then bring it into practical application, because it's like, okay, so like, how do I actually do this? So right. I like that. I wonder if you can actually go back and maybe talk a little bit more about these offsites, because, and again, this goes back to something else we talk about on every show, and this is actually going to be the last question, but there's a big importance. I don't know if that's the right phrase I want to use, but there's something critical if you want to grow and become a better leader, is you've got to actually invest in yourself and do some self-development. You can't wait for other people to just tap you on the shoulder. You're not going to accidentally become a person of influence or accidentally land in your dream job. So are your offsites, or is it something where, hey, I'm a manager, I want to become a better manager, I just show up, or do I register online, or how do I actually connect with you, I guess?
Yeah. Oh, good question. You could register online for the workshops. So you just register at www.gaynorconsulting.com.
Okay.
And you can register for the workshops there. They are highly practical. And, I use the guided discovery method. So there are lots of breakouts and discussions. But I'm really sharing the same skills that served me so well over 25 years. So I have a lot of confidence in them because they just were very effective for me in my leadership. And they're the same skills that I tried to impart to the men and women who served on my leadership teams. Mm-hmm. The other thing on that website is that I write try to write about once a month, a one-page article on a different facet of leadership. So I would tell you, Jamie, there are probably over 100 one-page articles archived on that website, and there's no cost to any of those. So those are all available to readers. And where else was I going to go with the third thing? Oh, yeah, the third thing I wanted to talk really briefly about with leadership development is that read. I would encourage your listeners to read. I still read, always have. I've read countless books. Sometimes you're going to find your best leadership mentors on bookshelves, but you do want to be a little bit careful, bearing in mind that I'm a proponent of timeless leadership, that everything that is written is not great. And just because it's a bestseller doesn't mean you should listen to it or read it. So you want to have a bit of a discerning mind. And every time for me that I read a book, a bestseller, where somebody says, I've discovered a new way to lead, I've done some research and figured out here's the new way to skin the cat, my radar goes right up.
Yeah.
So I tend to read practitioners who have been there and done it and have a track record of success. And people like Colin Powell's another favorite. I love Oren Harari's book, The Leadership Secrets of Colin Powell. Another guy who's been there and done it consistently, and another guy who, in my view, is a proponent of timeless leadership practices.
Yeah, I think that's some great advice, and really something to even make this even more practical. If you're walking around Chapters or Barnes and Noble or wherever you buy books, don't go there with intention of what you're wanting to develop. It's very tempting to look at the cover pages and the as you said, the bestsellers and pick a book just based on, I don't know, random thought. But if you're intentional about looking for something that you want to get better at, and then going in and looking for a book that's on one of those topics that's going to serve you well. And I had Richard Ryerson on the show. Was it last week? I think maybe two weeks ago. By the time this comes out, and I asked him for a book recommendation. He didn't recommend a book. He recommended one chapter of Good to Great, and I just thought it was brilliant. It's similar to what you're saying, Dan. It's like, hey, not everything, just because it's a bestseller, not everything's perfect. Go and find something specific that you want to get better at.
Well, and some of it's just flat out wrong. I mean, there's a big trend in leadership today that essentially says people don't really need to be led anymore, which is absolute nonsense. I mean, my view is everybody wants to be led someplace better. The problem we have today is too many leaders who can't even describe better, much less take people there. Every organization has always been driven by good vision with leaders who are passionate about it. They've always had a sense of order, not chaos. And so when I read some of this new stuff, it's just frankly bad stuff. It may sell well, but it's not good leadership. Yeah. So you got to have a discerning mind when you're going to the bookshelf and choosing what you're going to read.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I mean, that's with any information, though. I mean, it even goes to our social media today, and we're running a little bit past time, but too many people think just because it's written down, it's true. And just because you found it online, or just because you heard it on the news, or just because it's written in a top-selling book, does not mean it's true. And way easier said than done to actually, I guess, dissect and discern. But I think if you're intentional, and I think if you're going in as you say with I guess a purpose and looking for, well, I guess I don't know, just respect the past. And there's been some incredible leaders that we don't want to forget about just because they're not leading their companies today. I mean, when you think about people like Jack Welch, and when you think about there's a book by Barry Posner and Jim Kouzes, The Leadership Challenge, which I think was written, I don't know, 1980 or something like that. It's like it nothing's changed. So
no, good teams have always been good teams because leaders have done the same things well, and the teams that have struggled have always struggled because leaders have made the same mistakes. And 15 years now of teaching and consulting and coaching, Jamie, has only reaffirmed that. It doesn't matter what business I'm in, whether it's a ski resort or an accounting firm or a construction company, they all thrive or decline for the same reasons.
Yeah, love it. Well, anyway, again, we could probably talk for an hour about this, but we don't have time. So a lot of exciting things happening in your world. I'll link up your website and the books that we've talked about into the show notes. And those show notes are really easy to find because you can just hop over to yourbestmanager.com and search Dan. I think it's in the top right corner of the webpage, and you will find literally everything from today's episode. But before we say goodbye, Dan, do you have any, final words of encouragement for the future leader or the first-time manager who's listening today?
Yeah, what I would say is the world is full of too many leaders who are more concerned with playing it safe than they are with making a difference. So if you're a first-time or early leader, be a difference maker. Be a transformational leader. It always comes with some risk, but that's where all the upside is.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And thank you so much for your time today, Dan. And managers, I'm not sure if you're traveling to or from work, getting a workout in, or simply taking some time to relax and listen today, but I hope that you've been encouraged and inspired from our conversation with Dan Gaynor. Dan, thanks for sharing some of your story with the next generation of leaders. I truly appreciate it, and we'll talk soon.
My pleasure, Jamie. Thanks again.
All right, everyone, that does it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Now hop over to yourbestmanager.com and take advantage of the free tools, resources, and training which I've created exclusively for you, the next generation of leaders. Oh, and have fun. Hey everybody, one last thing before you go. If you have not registered yet for the 5-day leadership challenge, Uncover Your Leadership Potential in 5 days, you should do so, and you can register over at yourbestmanager.com/challenge.